Hi everyone, welcome to Storytime with Fairfield County Library. My name is Miss Nina and I am so excited for Storytime today. Before we get started, I want to remind you that we are doing hybrid Storytimes, which means on top of Storytimes online here, we are also doing them in person at the library. The in-person version of these Storytimes for the children's age group are at 4 p.m. on Wednesdays. Okay, now that that's out of the way, are you guys ready for Storytime? This week, our theme is books. This week, we're going to read some books about reading, writing, libraries, all things books. All right, our first book is How This Book Was Made by Mac Barnett, pictures by Adam Rex, and published by Disney Hyperion. At first, this book wasn't a book. It was just an idea. Ideas can come at funny times. When I had the idea for this book, I went to a quiet place and I wrote. I wrote from early in the morning until late at night. It was very hard work. Soon I had a bunch of words on paper. Those words were a first draft. The first draft of this book was not so good. Neither was the second draft, or the third, or the 12th. But writing lots of drafts is a useful part of the writing process. For instance, when the tiger came back for revenge because I beat him in an arm wrestling, I burned these drafts and scared him away. I worked, and with the 21st draft, I was done. So I sent my words to my editor in New York City. An editor tells you what parts of your story are good and what parts you need to fix. She is like a teacher, only she works in a skyscraper and is always eating fancy lunches. My editor called me and said, "I love this. This is perfect. Now here are all the things you have to change." And she sent the story back to me. I took some of her advice, and I ignored some of her advice. And then I sent the story back to her. She sent the story right back and asked me why I had ignored some of her advice. And I said I didn't think they were good ideas. And she said I thought they were great ideas. And I said, well, let's agree to disagree. And she said, let's agree with me. And I said, you're not the boss of me. And it went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Until most of the United States of America was crossed out. Many Americans were not happy about this. Eventually, my editor loved all of my words. And I loved all of my words. Even the tiger who had returned with a posse loved all my words. I was finished writing, but this book was still not a book. The words needed pictures, so my editor in New York sent them to an illustrator in Arizona. It took the illustrator a very long time to draw all the pictures for this book. I didn't know what he was doing that whole time, but he must have been working very hard. I sat around and waited. Finally, the illustrator sent all his artwork to New York. And his art and my text sat in a skyscraper waiting to be printed. Now, the fastest way to get this book to bookstores and libraries would be to print it nearby in New York, or Philadelphia, or maybe even Miami. But this book was printed in Malaysia. Malaysia, where contraptions called printing presses rumble and steam. A lady put the words and the art into one side of the machine, and out the other end came this book. And then another book, and another, and another. Thousands and thousands of books. This book was buried below a great pile so tall you could see it from space. Astronauts looked down at Earth that day and saw a stack of books and the Great Wall of China right next to each other. They smiled, then flirted around a bunch while eating astronaut ice cream. But that's science. This is literature. And at last, this book was ready to be read. It needed to get to the United States as fast as it could. Of course, the fastest way would be to put them on a jet. But this book got put on a boat. A slow boat took all the books across the sea. The journey was dull until the pirates arrived. The pirates swarmed the boat and quickly overran it. They tied up the crew and stole the captain's keys. The lead buccaneer kicked open the hatch to the ship's hold. The pirates held their breath and imagined their treasure. There was no gold inside, just books. Pirates don't read, so they sailed away. When this book came into harbor, it was put on a truck. The driver put the truck into gear and drove down the highway. He braked hard for a tiger crossing the road, and this book fell out the back. An eagle swooped down and grabbed this book for her babies. To eat, not to read. Eagles don't read books either. She ripped out a corner, but her chicks didn't like it. They pushed this book out of their nest. This book briefly served as a roof for a toad, until it was picked up by a dog that brought it back to its owner, who lost it that night in a bad hand of poker. To a truck driver whose load was one book short. He made his delivery to a woman who put it on a shelf next to many other books. This book waited, and I waited. And the tiger waited, and his posse waited, and the pirates and the astronauts and their editor waited, and the illustrator and the old lady and her dog waited, and the truck driver and the angry ink-splattered Americans and the family of eagles and the people of Malaysia. They waited, we all waited, here in this book, which was practically bursting, just waiting for someone to open it. Because a book can have words and pictures and paper and tigers, but a book still isn't a book. Not really, until it has a reader. And then you came along. and you read this book through to the very last page, which was how this book was made. That was how this book was made. What did you guys think? Have you ever wanted to be a writer? Okay, our next book is Miss Brooks Loves Books, and I Don't, by Barbara Bottner, illustrated by Michael Emberley, and published by Alfred A. Knopf. Miss Brooks is our librarian. She loves books. A lot. She loves the runaway bunny and Babar and where the wild things are and the very hungry caterpillar. I asked Miss Brooks why she dresses up for reading circle. I want you to get excited about books as I am, she says. I think Miss Brooks gets a little too excited, and I bet her costumes itch. Halloween means we each have to find a poem to share, but all the books with witches, ghosts, and goblins are checked out, and I hate pumpkins. So I make up a Halloween poem of my own. Eek, a freak. The class looks at me funny. Miss Brooks says, well, it's a start. All year long, Miss Brooks reads us books. Books about dragons and pilgrims and presidents. Books about love and leprechauns. Groundhogs even. It's vexing. Then, in May, Miss Brooks tells us about something truly terrifying. Book Week. You each need to pick a favorite story to share with the class. I want you to wear a costume and tell us all about it. Really show us why you love it, she says. I'll never love a book the way you do, I tell Miss Brooks. Don't be so sure, she says. When I get home, I ask my mother if we can move to a new town. My mom says there's a librarian in every town. I ask if she wants to do my assignment for me. I've already been in the first grade, says my mother. Book Week. Every single day of Book Week, kids share stories about trains and fairies and cowboys and dogs. When Miss Brooks asks what I think, I say, too flowery, too furry, too clickety, too yippity. So Miss Brooks fills my bag with more books for me to read with my mom. But I don't like any of them. They're too kissy, too pink, and too silly. I tell my mother, you're as stubborn as a wart, she says. Warts? I want to read a story about warts, I shout. My mother finds a book called Shrek. Shrek has hairs on his nose, and he snorts. I love that. Can you read it again? I ask. I love this book. I have to practice the words over and over, but my mother helps. Then we make an ogre costume. I make stick-on warts for the whole class. When I get to school the next day, I ask Miss Brooks to lend me a hand. When I say the word snort, the whole class snorts. I explain why a stubborn, smelly, snotty ogre searching for a revolting bride makes me laugh. Miss Brooks says she's glad I found a book to love. She says that even ogres, like me, can find something funny and fantastic and appalling in the library. And that is the slimy truth. That was Miss Brooks Loves Books and I Don't. What'd you guys think? Did you know Shrek was based on a book? Do you like books that are nasty and gross? Alright everyone, thank you for coming to Storytime. Now, just because we're done reading does not mean that we have to be done with Storytime. If you come down to the library this week, you can pick up a Storytime kit, which are these fun-filled activity kits that we made to go with the books you read today. Each kit comes with a coloring sheet, a craft, and a tasty recipe that you can make with your cronies. Our craft this week are these fruit corner bookmarks. To get a kit, you need to come to the Fairfield County Library and look for some crates in the children's section. Now we have 2 crates, one for the Monday story times and one for the Wednesdays. So you want to make sure to grab the right kits or you could end up with something completely different. The kits for this story time are in the children's crate. They are the blue ones. We have new kits every week, so make sure to check back in every time we do a new story time. Okay everyone, thank you for joining me for story time. Once again, my name is Miss Nina and I hope to see you in the library this week to pick up a story time kit. It's time to say goodbye, but I look forward to seeing you all next time. Bye!